"You step 1 foot on this dock and I'll have you arrested." That was the first thing I heard at 6:45 in the morning. Coffee still in hand, bathrobe barely tied, I stood frozen on my own dock. Well, what used to be my dock. A thick orange rope stretched across the ramp like I'd wandered onto some kind of crime scene. At the other end stood Karen Mallister, the HOA president, with a jaw clenched so tight it looked like she could chew through steel bolts. She clutched 2 things: a rolled-up HOA newsletter and a megaphone. Thank God she didn't use the megaphone, but she didn't need it. Karen's voice had that magical screech that could part water and set off car alarms, and she was already revving up for a full performance. I blinked, still not entirely awake, wondering if I'd stumbled into some bizarre HOA-themed nightmare. But no, the same cheap vinyl sign dangled from the rope. No access. Private Marina property. Except it wasn't private. Not to me. I had the deed. The dock had been there long before the HOA even existed. I built it myself, plank by plank, with my brother Jack after he came back from deployment. That dock was part of my soul, and now Karen was standing on it like she claimed it in the name of some suburban empire. "Have you lost your mind?" I asked, keeping my voice deliberately calm. She smiled like a crocodile. The HOA voted unanimously. All private docks are now considered part of the community waterfront. You should really keep up with the newsletter. She held it up like some sacred scroll. I didn't take it. Instead, I walked up and lightly tugged the rope. It wasn't even secured properly. More of a dramatic prop than a real blockade. Karen gasped like I just vandalized the Lincoln Memorial. "That's tampering with HOA property," she barked. "I could have you cited." I told her to go ahead. Cite me, fine me, put a glittery HOA curse on my house for all I cared. But she had no right to touch my dock, and I was going to prove it. That's when she stepped closer, just a little too close, eyes narrowing like a villain in a soap opera, and hissed, "Good luck fighting the law, dock boy." That's when I smiled, not because I was amused, but because I had already started dialing my lawyer. The news traveled fast. Apparently, the HOA had held a secret vote to consolidate shoreline assets for the betterment of the community. Translation: they wanted to make the lake into their private playground and cut off anyone who didn't kiss their polyester-panted backsides. I wasn't the only one affected, but I was the first to push back. And that, of course, made me their #1 target. 2 days later, I showed up at the HOA meeting. I wasn't there to argue. I was there to observe. I brought a clipboard, wore my best faded fishing shirt, and sat dead center in the front row like it was game day. Karen stood at the head of the conference room like some sort of over-decorated general, giving a PowerPoint presentation filled with bar graphs that made 0 sense and lots of phrases like shared responsibility and community-centric waterfront vision. When it was time for questions, I raised my hand. Karen called on me like I was a 5th grader about to embarrass myself. Instead, I asked a very simple question. "Can you show us the vote sheet from the meeting where this dock decision was made?" She hesitated. I smiled again. One of her sidekicks, a guy named Mitchell who looked like he only showed up for the free cookies, rummaged through a folder and handed me a copy. I glanced at it and spotted something interesting immediately. A signature from a resident named Carla Reynolds. I knew every single person in the neighborhood. Carla Reynolds had moved out 2 years ago. That's when I started taking pictures of the document in front of the whole board. Karen tried to snatch it away. I told her any document presented in a public HOA meeting was fair game. Back home that evening, I pulled out the original blueprints of my lot. Sure enough, my property line extended 6 feet past the shoreline. That dock? 100% within my rights. I emailed everything to my lawyer and started making calls. I wasn't just mad. I was motivated. Karen had poked the wrong bear, and she didn't even know it yet. That night, I took a long walk down the lake, needing to clear my head. That's when I saw the HOA's so-called community dock, if you could even call it that. It was a rickety mess of warped boards and loose nails, sagging into the water like a dying animal. 2 lawn chairs sat at the edge, one broken, the other duct taped. I actually laughed out loud. This was their big plan. steal my dock, the only decent structure on this end of the lake, and claimed they were upgrading. Then I looked farther across the water to the marina. It wasn't flashy, but it was big. A little old, a little rust-stained, but the boats still lined up neatly, and the dock lighting still flickered to life every night like clockwork. I remembered hearing rumors that it was struggling, bad management, bad debts, something like that. I'd fished from there years ago. The place had potential, and suddenly, the idea hit me so hard I nearly dropped my phone. What if I didn't just fight the HOA? What if I bought the whole damn lake access right out from under them? I called an old friend, Nathan. We used to work together back in my engineering days. He'd since gone into real estate development. You wouldn't happen to know who owns Lakeview Marina? I asked. Nathan chuckled. Funny you should ask. Just came across my desk last week. It's going up for sale. Quietly. You interested? I might be, I said, watching the HOA dock creak and wobble under the weight of a raccoon. I might be very interested. Back at home, I sat on my deck with a cold beer, staring out at the rope still draped across my dock like some sort of pathetic threat. Karen thought she'd won. She thought slapping a piece of cheap nylon between me and my boat was the end game. She had no idea she'd just opened the first move in a war she couldn't possibly win. The next morning, I woke up to another delightful surprise. An envelope from the HOA duct-taped to my mailbox, marked urgent violation. I peeled it open, expecting more nonsense, and of course I wasn't disappointed. Trespassing on community dock property. Fine $1,500 due immediately. Below that was a blurry photo of me standing on my own dock, taken from the bushes like some low-rent private investigator was out practicing. I shook my head, wondering if I should laugh or call the police. Karen really thought she could find me off my own land. She wasn't just delusional. She was escalating, and that meant I had to do the same. I called my lawyer, Victor, and forwarded him the violation notice. He responded within 20 minutes with legal documents, maps, deed history, and a beautifully worded cease and desist letter. I printed it out, walked it straight to the HOA office, which was just a converted pool shed, and taped it right over the HOA's community bulletin board. Just for good measure, I added a copy to Karen's car windshield. She didn't take that well. Within the hour, I had 2 HOA board members knocking on my door, flanked by clipboard-wielding Karen. She demanded I remove the letter and accused me of threatening the social fabric of the community. I reminded her that trespassing onto private property and issuing fraudulent fines was actual, illegal. Karen gave me her trademark tight smile and said, "We'll see what the county says." Then she stormed off in a flurry of beige slacks and rage perfume. The thing is, I'd already called the county, and I wasn't just waiting. I was moving. While Karen and her goons were busy cooking up imaginary violations, I was working on something much bigger. Nathan had sent over the financials for the marina. It was worse than I expected. Delinquent taxes, half the docks rotting, zero security, and the owner had apparently vanished to Ibiza. But the upside, it was undervalued by at least 40%. If I moved fast and quiet, I could scoop it up before anyone noticed. So I did, through a shell company called Waterstone Ventures LLC, just vague enough to fly under Karen's radar. I put in a cash offer. Within 2 weeks, the deal was closed. I now owned the only functional marina for 3 miles in either direction. The same marina Karen's precious HOA relied on for their pontoon parties and kayak meetups. I didn't gloat. Not yet. I wanted it to be perfect. While my legal victory brewed, I started renovations on the marina. Nothing flashy, just critical upgrades. Reinforced walkways, functional lighting, upgraded slips, and brand new signage. All courtesy of a very discreet team Nathan hooked me up with. I told them to work fast, but keep the branding vague. I didn't want the HOA getting wind of who was behind it. Meanwhile, I kept walking my dock every morning, coffee in hand, like nothing had happened. And every day, Karen's blood pressure seemed to climb a little higher. Then came the kayak incident. It was a calm Sunday afternoon. I was fixing a few solar lights along the shoreline when I heard shouting. Karen was flailing in the water next to her overturned kayak, clearly furious that no one was helping her. A couple of teenagers filmed from the bushes while she splashed and screamed about water snakes and conspiracy. I walked over calmly, tossed her a rope, and suggested she try not trespassing next time. She accused me of sabotage, said my dock radiated hostility, and threatened another fine. That video, by the way, hit 3,000 views in under 2 hours on the neighborhood Facebook group. The cracks were forming. Karen's power was built on intimidation and theatrics, but I had something she didn't: patience and a plan. I noticed more residents starting to question things. A couple even whispered support when I passed them during my walks. One elderly couple, the Watkins, invited me over for iced tea and quietly confessed they were afraid of Karen but hated what she was doing to the community. "It's not just you," Mrs. Watkins said. "She finds us for gardening too loud." I started documenting everything. Every bogus fine, every incident of trespassing, every change they made to the bylaws without proper notice. I kept it all in a neat little folder I labeled HOA Shenanigans, and that folder was growing thick. Meanwhile, I poured a little more into the marina, installed security cameras, hired a part-time guard, and replaced the community bulletin board with one that actually told the truth. Every upgrade I made felt like reclaiming the lake itself. And the funny part, Karen still hadn't figured it out. She thought the marina had been bought by some big developer. She even ranted at a meeting that corporate interests are trying to privatize our waters, completely unaware that the corporate interest in question was me. Things took a turn when Karen tried to launch an HOA kayak event from the new marina. My new marina. She marched down with her clipboard, a whistle, and a flock of bored residents towing their boats. They were stopped at the gate by my security guy, Felix, who very politely asked for membership passes. When Karen demanded to speak to the owner, he handed her a policy brochure and said, "All inquiries must go through corporate. We don't deal directly with HOA groups." She turned red, like stop sign red. Her voice cracked as she declared they had a perpetual use agreement. Felix showed her the newly recorded county lease terms. "That agreement expired last year, ma'am." Karen turned on her heel and hissed something about lawyers. Felix just smiled and said, "We have one too." I watched from a distance, sipping lemonade on a bench. She didn't even look my way. To her, I was still just some grumpy guy with a dock and an attitude. That was perfect. I wanted her to underestimate me because when the moment came, it would hit harder. That evening, a neighborhood barbecue was held in the Central Park. I brought a cooler of ribs and stayed quiet, just listening. Karen gave a speech about threats to our way of life and warned everyone not to trust outsiders. Someone whispered to her that I was there. She glanced over and raised her glass in a fake smile. I returned the favor with a wave and a wink. She had no idea that by the next community meeting, her entire lake empire was about to start crumbling, and I was going to enjoy every second of the splashdown. The purchase was complete. The marina was mine, the documents sealed, the taxes paid, and the ownership registered quietly through Waterstone Ventures LLC. It was a name I pulled from an old childhood memory of skimming rocks across the lake with my brother. Harmless, vague, corporate sounding. Exactly the kind of name that would give Karen nightmares without ever giving her a clue about who she was dealing with. I had just bought her lifeline to the water, and she was still too busy barking at everyone over fence heights and mailbox paint colors to notice the shoreline slipping from her grip. Within days, the new fencing went up around the marina's border, and the gate system was replaced with a digital access panel that required member key cards. The signage was the cherry on top: private marina, members only, HOA-affiliated groups prohibited without written permission. I made sure that last part was bold enough to give her heartburn. The best part? People started calling the Waterstone office, inquiring about membership. Most were sick of the HOA and loved the idea of joining something with actual freedom, even if it cost a few bucks. I offered early bird pricing for non-HOA residents, and it spread like wildfire. Karen may have had a grip on the neighborhood, but I had the water now, and it turns out people like water more than monthly fines. Then came the day the HOA tried to strike back. I knew it was coming. I just didn't expect it to be so laughably dramatic. Karen, Mitchell, and their favorite pencil pusher, Denise, stood in front of the new Marina gate with a stack of papers and a local news camera they had invited for what Karen called a stand against corporate tyranny. I watched it later on the 6 o'clock news and nearly choked on my popcorn. Karen, in full HOA regalia, complete with a visor, called Waterstone Ventures a predatory real estate empire attempting to destroy community access to public resources. The fact that the marina had always been privately owned didn't seem to register in her speech. Facts rarely do with people like her. Still, the image of her shaking her fist at a locked gate, while boats floated peacefully behind her, was priceless. But what she did next pushed things from laughable to legally reckless. She had the HOA's lawyer send a cease and desist to Waterstone Ventures, claiming that the marina was illegally obstructing access to a recognized community asset. I forwarded it to my own attorney, Victor, who laughed so hard on the phone he had to mute himself. His reply to her lawyer was swift, sharp, and filled with just enough legal weight to cause indigestion. He included scans of the property deed, satellite imagery proving no access ever existed for the HOA across that land, and a polite note suggesting that any further claims might be considered harassment. Karen didn't respond directly, but that weekend, I noticed she stopped doing her usual morning strolls along the lakeside trail. It was probably too painful to walk past something she no longer controlled, but the real fun came during the HOA's monthly barbecue. Karen was in rare form, clearly rattled but doing her best to pretend everything was fine. She plastered on her smile, wore her obnoxiously patriotic apron that read, "Lake life is best life," and served overcooked hot dogs like she hadn't just gotten legally smacked into next week. I waited until halfway through the event before I stood up to make a little announcement. "Hey, neighbors," I called out, raising a glass. "Just wanted to share a quick update. Some of you might have noticed a few changes across the lake. I'm happy to let you know that Waterstone Ventures has officially opened membership to the newly upgraded marina. We've got full security, slip rentals, kayak storage, and member-exclusive events." A few people clapped. Karen's face turned pale, but I wasn't done. "One more thing," I added, reaching into my pocket. "This is the official policy brochure. It states that all HOA-affiliated groups are unfortunately ineligible for membership due to a recent series of legal threats." Gasps rippled through the crowd, but I continued. "We are offering a discounted welcome package for independent households. You know, for folks who like to enjoy the lake without getting fined for grilling salmon instead of burgers." That one got laughter. People were starting to connect the dots. Karen stood frozen, tongs in hand, her mouth twitching like she was about to scream or cry or both. Mitchell whispered something in her ear, probably asking if they should call security. Denise dropped her plate. I just smiled, raised my glass again, and sat back down. That night, I received a message from one of the newer residents, a guy named Taylor who just moved in a few months ago. He said he loved what I was doing and wanted to join the marina immediately. He also mentioned something curious, that Karen had personally warned him during move-in that I was a problem neighbor and that he shouldn't talk to me. He laughed it off, but it confirmed what I suspected. Karen wasn't just petty. She was actively trying to manipulate people into isolating me. Unfortunately for her, the plan was backfiring. Over the next week, more residents signed up for Waterstone membership. I started offering boat safety classes and weekend fishing tutorials for kids. One family even volunteered to help repaint the dock. Every single one of them had at least one story about being bullied or fined over nothing. The HOA wasn't just disliked, it was quietly despised. Karen had ruled through fear and paperwork for years, but once people saw there was a way around her grip, they began choosing joy instead of HOA-approved misery. Then came the cherry on top. An anonymous tip was sent to the county inspector's office. They showed up unannounced at the HOA clubhouse and dock and found multiple violations: broken handrails, unsecured dock planks, and lack of emergency equipment. Since the HOA had been so busy harassing others, they'd ignored their own responsibilities. The clubhouse was temporarily shut down for safety concerns. I wasn't the one who made the call, but I had my suspicions. A neighbor who used to be Karen's friend winked at me the next day and said, "Sometimes karma floats." By now, Karen was spinning. She called another emergency HOA meeting and tried to rally the troops. She claimed we were under siege, that a shadowy billionaire was trying to take over the lake, and that residents needed to show unity. But the room wasn't on her side anymore. People asked real questions. Why were they fined for hanging wind chimes? Why was the HOA spending thousands on legal letters instead of fixing the broken clubhouse steps? Karen didn't have answers. She just kept repeating, "It's about order. It's about standards." Someone finally stood up, Mrs. Watkins of all people, and said, "No, Karen. It's about control, and we're done letting you have it." The applause that followed was louder than anything I'd ever heard at one of those meetings, and I didn't even have to say a word. The morning after Mrs. Watkins' mic drop moment, things began unraveling faster than Karen could staple up a new rule sheet. Word spread like wildfire through the community. People who had once tiptoed around HOA meetings suddenly found their voices. A petition calling for a vote of no confidence in the HOA board appeared on nearly every doorstep overnight. It only needed 20 signatures. By lunchtime, it had 73, and I hadn't even touched it. That was the most satisfying part. This wasn't my war anymore. Karen had picked a fight with the lake, and the lake was finally fighting back. But true to her character, Karen didn't step down. She didn't apologize. She doubled down. That afternoon, she marched right up to the marina, my marina, and tried launching her boat from the side of the embankment by passing the locked gate. Her plan failed immediately. Not only did she scrape the side of her precious boat against some exposed rock, but she also trespassed into a protected wetland area. And wouldn't you know it, that area had been under monitoring by the state's Department of Fish and Wildlife, who filed the report. Probably nobody she'd suspect, but I did happen to know that my cousin William worked for them and had recently been reassigned to this region. William called me that evening, chuckling. She screamed about diplomatic immunity from HOA jurisdiction and said the wetland map was fake. We had to physically walk her to the car to calm her down. She walked away with 3 citations and a hefty fine, her boat towed and impounded for being launched in an unauthorized area. I don't know what made me happier, that it happened, or that I didn't even have to lift a finger. It was a sweet kind of justice when people's own arrogance paved the road to their downfall. Karen didn't give up, though. No, she went the full spite route. The next day, county inspectors showed up at my property. 2 guys in safety vests and clipboards knocked on my door and told me they were there to investigate reports of unpermitted dock construction, unlicensed fencing, and potential environmental hazards from water pumps. I invited them in, offered coffee, and handed them an organized binder with every permit deed and legal clearance under the sun. I even included the solar panel approvals and the Marina tax receipts, just for flair. One inspector flipped through it, whistled, and said, "Wow, you're more organized than we are." They found nothing. Absolutely nothing. In fact, they found that my dock was one of the few shoreline structures that actually met the newest safety standards. But they did find something else while doing their inspection. A drainage pipe from the HOA clubhouse was leaking directly into the lake without proper filtration. That discovery sent them straight over to Karen's office with a warning notice and a follow-up inspection order. By the time the sun set, the clubhouse was closed pending repairs. My dock still standing strong, pristine, and very, very legal. That night, I got another call, this time from a neighbor named Ethan, who had once been one of Karen's loudest supporters. He apologized for ever siding with her and admitted he had finally seen the writing on the wall. "She's lost it," he said. "We all just wanted a clean neighborhood, not a dictatorship." I appreciated the honesty. Then he surprised me. "A few of us are thinking of starting a new association, just a voluntary community network. No fines, just folks helping each other out. We'd love for you to be part of it." I agreed on the spot. That's what this place used to be before the HOA turned it into a soap opera. Neighbors used to borrow sugar, not submit lawn reports. They used to help with gutters, not send photos of weeds to the board. If Ethan and the others were serious about changing the culture, I was all in. But Karen somehow still had one last hand to play. She called a private emergency HOA meeting, bearing anyone who wasn't a board member. The rumor was she planned to announce legal action against Waterstone Ventures. Unfortunately for her, 2 board members secretly recorded the meeting and leaked the audio. It was an hour-long meltdown of threats, conspiracy theories, and wild accusations, including a bizarre claim that I was part of an anti-lake cartel. When the audio hit the neighborhood group chat, it was over. There was no defending it anymore. Even her most loyal lapdogs started backing away. The vote to remove Karen as HOA president happened the following weekend in the park. It was a simple affair: folding chairs, iced lemonade, and a ballot box with actual transparency for once. 92% voted yes. She was done, removed, stripped of her position and her privileges. Mitchell and Denise resigned minutes later to save face. Karen tried to argue that the vote was invalid due to unapproved font usage on the ballot forms, but nobody listened. They were too busy cheering. After the vote, I got up and made a short speech. I didn't gloat or rub salt in the wound. I just thanked everyone for standing up when it mattered. I reminded them that communities weren't meant to be ruled by fear, but guided by trust. Then I made an announcement that caught everyone off guard. I was officially opening up the Marina, now fully renovated and rebranded as Lakeside Commons, to all non-HOA affiliated residents. Free trial memberships for anyone who helped sign the petition. I'd host monthly community events and weekend boating workshops. Kids could come learn to fish and kayak, and I had hired 2 local teens to work as summer dock assistants. The place was no longer just mine. It belonged to everyone who'd stood up and said enough was enough. Karen didn't show her face for a few days, but of course she couldn't help herself for long. Late one evening, I spotted her sneaking around the edge of the marina with a giant inflatable raft, paddling it silently toward one of the private slips like she was part of some covert mission. Unfortunately for her, the new cameras caught everything. The motion lights kicked on, the speakers activated, and Felix, my marina security guy, calmly approached her with a flashlight and a clipboard. The footage was gold: Karen in gym clothes and Crocs, half screaming, half whispering about her constitutional right to enter the water, being escorted off the property while trying to cling to her raft like it was a lifeboat from the Titanic. The video ended up online within hours. Someone added dramatic music and a slow-motion replay of her slipping on the wet dock. It was viewed over 20,000 times by morning. As I watched the sun rise over the water the next day, coffee in hand, I couldn't help but smile. Not because Karen had finally been humbled, or because the HOA had been dethroned, but because the lake was peaceful again. Boats glided across the calm surface, kids laughed from the docks, and neighbors actually waved at one another. It was the kind of quiet, beautiful victory that didn't eat noise, just a man, a dock, and a view no HOA could ever take again. The days following Karen's final failed mission were oddly serene. There was a calm in the neighborhood that hadn't existed in years, like someone had finally pulled a splinter from the community's collective foot. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now waved as they passed. Parents brought their kids down to the marina with fishing poles and packed lunches. The HOA headquarters, once the command center of petty tyranny, now sat quiet with a handwritten sign taped to the door. Closed until further notice. That notice had been there for 5 days and counting. The official investigation into the HOA's internal mismanagement began quietly, but it didn't stay that way for long. The county clerk's office received a packet of documents, anonymous, of course, detailing falsified voting records, forged signatures, and inappropriate use of HOA funds, including a suspicious payment to a local landscaping company that was, in fact, owned by Karen's nephew. That sparked a full financial audit. When the dust settled, the HOA was slapped with a $50,000 penalty, their bank account frozen, and their nonprofit status placed under review. It was the administrative version of a sledgehammer to the face. Karen tried to spin it in the community newsletter, her last desperate grasp at rewriting the story. She blamed malicious sabotage by fringe elements and claimed she had been missiled by incompetent subordinates. But nobody believed it, not after everything that had come out. Not after the videos, the citations, the boat fiasco, or the recordings from that unhinged emergency meeting. The truth was clear. She had run the HOA like a kingdom, and the villagers had finally revolted. For a while, I kept my head down. I wasn't in it for the fame or the attention. I just wanted peace, and I finally had it. But peace has a funny way of attracting people. I began getting calls from folks in other communities, friends of friends, relatives of neighbors, asking for advice on how to handle their own HOA nightmares. I wasn't looking to become a crusader, but I did start writing things down. A small guide, a sort of survival manual titled How to Dismantle a Tyrannical HOA Without Losing Your Mind or Your Dock. Maybe one day I'd actually publish it. The Marina, on the other hand, was thriving. We officially rebranded it as Lakeside Commons and launched a weekend community program. Every Saturday, we held themed events, kayak races, fishing derbies, waterside yoga. Local businesses began sponsoring them, and the money we made went into scholarships for local teens interested in environmental sciences. A few former HOA enforcers even applied for membership, but we kept things respectful. No vendettas, no revenge, just a simple rule. No drama, no Karen, no problem. The most poetic moment, though, came one sunny afternoon when I saw Mrs. Watkins gently paddling a bright red canoe around the lake, her husband waving from the dock as she glided past. It was the same canoe Karen had once tried to ban for being too colorful and visually disruptive. The old couple laughed, holding hands as if reclaiming a piece of their youth. That sight, more than any lawsuit or gate code, was my favorite kind of justice. Karen, meanwhile, faded away. She moved out 2 months after the board formally dissolved. Rumor had it she tried to join the HOA in the next town over and was rejected before her application even finished printing. I heard she'd been spotted arguing with a grocery store cashier about unacceptable cart arrangement and muttering something about bylaws at the post office. The power was gone, but the personality stayed, and that was punishment enough. A few weeks later, the neighborhood held its first ever non-HOA town hall meeting, organized by regular folks with no clipboards or laminated charts. We met in the park under string lights and folding tents, with lemonade pitchers and homemade cookies. It wasn't about rules anymore. It was about community. People proposed real ideas, book swaps, tool sharing programs, a monthly movie night by the lake. Someone even suggested turning the old HOA office into a free library. No one shut it down. No one demanded a form. Everyone just nodded, excited. I took a moment during that meeting to walk down to the edge of the water. My dock, now fully restored and gleaming in the golden evening light, stretched out like a quiet monument to the battle we'd won. I'd installed a small plaque on the first post, not flashy, not petty, just a simple metal plate that read, "Dock Boys Revenge." A private joke, but one that always made me smile. That night, as the sun dipped below the trees and laughter floated up from the park, I sat at the edge of that dock and let the silence wrap around me. This lake, this neighborhood, this little piece of the world, it was mine again. Not in a possessive way, in a restored way, in a way that meant people could enjoy their homes without fear of being fined for hanging a wind chime or parking 2 inches off-center. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about healing. And yet, just as I began to drift into the comfort of that thought, I heard it. A distant rumble of a boat engine sputtering to life, then choking out. I looked across the water and saw, unbelievably, Karen standing at the shoreline next to an inflatable dinghy with what looked like a lawnmower engine strapped to it. She was shouting at a small crowd of confused bystanders, trying to get her contraption into the water. A Marina staffer gently approached, said something I couldn't hear, and Karen pointed wildly at the lake, stomping her foot like a child denied a toy. Then the security camera light kicked on. The staffer made a call, and Karen's voice turned shrill enough to pierce glass. I didn't even need to listen. I already knew how it would go. She'd get escorted away again. She'd probably rant on Nextdoor about freedom of navigation and weaponized security protocols. But it didn't matter. That wasn't a threat anymore. That was just noise fading into the background of a story already concluded. I stood up, stretched, and walked back toward the park, where neighbors were handing out seed kits and planting a community garden. And as I joined them, a thought crossed my mind, one that brought a grin I couldn't hide. They stole my dock, so I bought their lake, and in the end, I didn't just get it back. I gave it back to everyone who truly deserved it.